Yo, how's it going everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now today's video is going to be a little different. I'm going to be talking about how I edit my photos in Lightroom. It's definitely going to be a little bit more informative and technical. So for those of you who are still kind of beginner to intermediate, I feel like this would be a very good tutorial for you. Before we get into it, I want to thank today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark is a VPN, or a virtual private network service, that provides you with protection by encrypting all the data that you send through the internet, keeping anyone unwanted from seeing it. Have you ever Googled something once and the next thing you know you're getting a streamline of ads across all your social media platforms? This has happened to me way too many times. Luckily, Surfshark provides their own search engine with no ads or trackers following your every move. Surfshark also enables you to place your laptop or mobile device anywhere in the world and allows you to access the internet as if you were in that country. So for example, if you're trying to access your bank account when abroad, Surfshark can help you connect to a VPN back in your home country, preventing you from getting locked out of your account. So if you want both protection and freedom, click the link in the description and use code CAZ for 83% off and 3 extra months for free. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out for yourself. Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Alright, so in today's video, we're mainly going to be focusing on using Lightroom. Full disclosure, by no means am I a professional photographer. I honestly still consider myself very amateur. But I still want to show you guys how I go about editing my car photos. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into Lightroom. Alright, now that we are in Lightroom, we can see that I have quite a few photos imported already. So let's go ahead and just start editing this photo. This is the photo that looks like it needs the most work, so I want to show you guys how I edit something like this. Now, like I mentioned before, this video is geared more towards the intermediate and beginner photographers, so I'm not going to teach you every single tool on Lightroom. There are a bunch of videos online that are going to teach you. I'm just going to show you how I go about editing my photo using this program. So if you are already familiar with Lightroom, you can definitely learn a thing or two. Alright, diving in. First thing I want to say is that you should always be shooting your photos in RAW, just because there's more data in the file, meaning you can bring back a lot of detail in the shadows and highlights. So as you can see in this photo, it is pretty underexposed because I exposed for the highlights in the outside of this parking garage. So bringing back the detail in the shadows is a lot easier than trying to bring back detail in the highlights, which is why I exposed this image for the highlights so I can still preserve the detail outside. First thing I want to do when I'm editing any photo is go down to lens correction and enable profile corrections. So this is pretty much just going to fix any distortion and vignetting that goes on in the corner of the image. So as you can see, this is a before and after. Alright, so now that is done, I'm gonna go up to my white balance. White balance is the next thing I usually do. Since the image is pretty dark, I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. So as you can see, a lot of the detail in the shadows came back. And take this little dropper tool and find a very neutral area in the photo. Generally, when doing this, you want to have those 3 numbers, RGB, be relatively close to each other. So as you can see, the RGB, they're all around 33%, which is perfect. So this is gonna give me a perfect white balance. I'm gonna go ahead and bring that exposure back down. And then the next thing I usually do is make sure that the photo is level. Usually if you do auto, it does a pretty good job of leveling the photo. And next up we have exposure. So like you guys saw earlier, if I bring this all the way up, there is still a lot of detail in the shadows, which is good. That's very good. Let's go ahead and bring this back down to maybe around, I would say 2 is a good number. So as you can see, now that I brought the exposure up of the whole image, the highlights are very blown out. So we go to the highlights slider and bring that down, and you can see the trees outside again. a good tool to use when doing your basic exposure adjustments is looking at this histogram on the top right corner. As you can see, most of the data lands in the middle, and that's what you're aiming for. So far we're doing an okay job. Now moving down to the clarity slider. Now this is a slider that a lot of beginner photographers tend to overdo. They like to bring this clarity slider all the way up, and it just makes for a really HDR looking photo, and I don't really like that. So everything, you know, in moderation, you know, less is more. So when shooting cars, I usually bring the slider up to 5 or 10, but I try not to overdo it. So 5 is usually where I just leave it at. And then vibrance and saturation, I'm gonna just leave that alone. So now moving on to the tone curve. The tone curve allows you to manipulate the shadows, midtones, and highlights a bit more. So generally, I like to start with 3 points. And from these 3 points, I'm gonna start the shadows, lift this up just a tad, don't wanna overdo the fading in the shadows, and then bring down the shadows here, so I have some of that contrast back. So this S-curve is something that I've kind of come up with on my own. I've started to go for more of the crushed highlights look. It makes the photo look very dreamy, I guess you could say, and it's kind of just a style that I've been going with lately. So this works for me, especially in this scenario where the highlights are really bright. Crushing your highlights in the tone curve works pretty well, at least in my preference. So that is looking pretty good. So if you guys want to see the before, all you gotta do is press this / key on your keyboard so you can see the before image and the after. So now moving on to the HSL sliders, or the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders. These sliders allow you to manipulate each individual color. If you want to see what the image looks like without the effects that you just applied, you can go ahead and toggle the switch up here next to the module of whatever you are working on, and you can see what it is before and after. Now moving down to split toning. Split toning is where you can be more creative, and this is kind of where you put your own spin on the photo or your own style into it. Generally, I like to start with the shadows. I've been really liking green tones, so I'm gonna bring it somewhere around this yellow and green area, maybe around here. Okay, and bring the saturation down. So it's just a tad graded, so it's not too dramatic. You can see that. And then the highlights. So generally when you're split toning, you want to have your shadows and highlights to be opposing colors on the color wheel. So if you're gonna choose a cool color for your shadows, you're gonna want a warm color for your highlights. That way it can balance each other out and it just is more pleasing to the eye. According to the color theory, that's how it should be done. So in the highlights, I'm going to bring a more cooler color, maybe around the cyan. And I don't want my image to look too blue, so maybe around 2 to 3. And okay, you can go ahead and toggle this effect off and see what it looks like before and after. I think I'm happy with that. It's very subtle, and you don't want to overdo split toning, but it does add that little bit of color to your shadows and highlights. And now onto details. Typically, I don't really touch the sharpening slider. I kind of just leave it at the default, which is set at 40 right now. But I do use the masking slider under sharpening. And pretty much masking, if you were to hold Alt or Option on your keyboard and you use the slider, this allows you to mask where the sharpening is going to be. So as you can see, where all the white lines are is where the image is going to be sharpened, and I generally just want the car to be sharp and not the background. So I'm going to leave it right there, and that looks pretty good. Okay, now back down to lens corrections. I do like adding a little bit of vignetting to my photo. You can use post-crop vignetting, which is all the way down at effects, but I like to use the vignetting under lens corrections because it just has a more natural feel to it. Just vignette that a little bit. So here's a before, here's an after, before, after. So you can see that a lot of the detail was brought back in the shadows while still preserving the details in the highlights. Now we can take this a step further. So I'm gonna go up to this tool. It's called the graduated filter. I'm gonna bring this tool and create a filter coming down from this outside spot. And then I can even bring down the highlights more, so you can see more of those trees and it won't be blown out as much. You can see it without the filter, with the filter. So now that I was able to bring back the highlight without affecting the rest of the image, I'm gonna go ahead and readjust the highlights in the main image, just so my headlights are a tad brighter. Go back up here and then bring the highlights down on that filter, because I still want my headlights to be somewhat bright and not completely crushed. So, right, and I think I'm pretty happy with how this image turned out. So now that I finished editing this photo, I highly recommend taking a step away from the computer just so you can refresh your brain, because a lot of the times when we're editing, we tend to get so caught up in, you know, all the sliders and adjusting these colors, adjusting the highlights, doing this and that. You don't notice that you may be over editing the image. That's what we're gonna do right now. I'm gonna step away from the computer, and hopefully when I come back, this edit isn't terrible. Alright, now that we're back, I am looking at my edit and I must say, I still think it looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and say this is done. I do want to show you guys how I edit with presets. We're gonna go back into Lightroom and move on to my next photo. Here's a photo of my buddy's car. I shot in SF a few weeks back. So I'm going to go down, do the profile corrections, and just go straight into my presets. So I do have a Sushi preset pack that I'm gonna have available for you guys to purchase. So if you guys are interested in that, I will have the link to my preset pack in the description below. So for this one, I'm gonna kind of just skim through my presets, see what I like best. And I'm gonna go for the Toro preset. And I think that's pretty good. Like literally, maybe just adjust the brightness a little bit. Bring back the highlights so the car is a little bit brighter. And I'm pretty happy with this image. A little before and after. And this preset actually worked really well. Now, presets cannot be applied to every single photo. Obviously, each photo has a different lighting situation, each photo's setting is different, the colors are different, so these presets aren't gonna work on everything, but for the most part, I try to make my presets somewhat universal so you can apply it to a lot of things, but it's not gonna work in all situations. Like I said, I will have my presets available for you guys to buy in the description below. And also, before I end the video, I still have some shirts available, so if you guys would like to support my brand, Hero. This one has the waves in the back. Really like this design. And I also have restocked on my carabiners. I also released a new color. So this is kind of a beige color. And if you guys would like to support my brand, go ahead and check out my website, projecthero.com. Hope you guys gained some insight and some knowledge on how to improve your own photo editing. And yeah, that'll do it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.